The First Strike and the Time Rift. The UES Horizon, a deep space exploration vessel, drifted silently through the vastness of the Orion expanse. Captain Elias Cade studied the anomaly ahead, a massive, ancient construct of unknown origin, pulsing faintly with blue light. Scanners detected no life signs, no energy fluctuations, nothing except an eerie gravitational distortion. "This thing's been here for millennia," murmured Lieutenant Vasquez. "Who built it? More importantly," Cade said, "why is it still active?" As they launched a probe, reality fractured. A shock wave rippled through space, twisting light and distorting time itself. The ship's systems flickered, and for a moment, Cade swore he saw his own reflection age 100 years in the viewport before snapping back to normal. Then came a distress calls. "Sir, we're detecting ourselves, but the signals are centuries apart." Before Cade could process the anomaly, something else appeared. Ships, black, angular, and bristling with organic spines, erupted from the void. Their sleek, insectoid designs bore the unmistakable markings of hostility. The first blast shredded the Horizon's escort ships before they could react. Plasma fire raked across the hull, shields collapsing like wet paper. The enemy moved too fast, predicting human movements with eerie precision. It wasn't a battle, it was an extermination. The Zalvari had arrived. Humanity had always theorized about alien life. Some believed first contact would be diplomatic, others feared invasion. No one had predicted war across time itself. The time front is born. The Zalvari did not communicate. No warnings, no ultimatums. They simply unleashed hell. Within days, dozens of colonies fell. But there was something wrong with how the war unfolded. Fleets would launch counterattacks, only to find their targets already destroyed centuries ago. Entire battles were fought in the past, their consequences rippling forward to erase victories before they even happened. At UE Command, Admiral Rhea Langley grimly assessed the chaos. Reports came in of ships disappearing mid-combat, only to reappear years later, minutes after they had left. Some officers claimed they had fought battles they hadn't yet deployed for. The war was not linear. A name emerged for this nightmare: the Time Front. Through desperate research, scientists discovered the Zalvari were adapted to this chaos. Their species had evolved around time fractures, existing across multiple timelines at once. They weren't just invading, they were rewriting history. If humanity wanted to survive, they needed new tactics. The first response. A countermeasure was devised. The Eternals Initiative, elite human soldiers subjected to extreme temporal conditioning, capable of fighting in unstable time flows without breaking. Meanwhile, temporal beacons were developed to stabilize reality in key battle zones. As humanity scrambled to adapt, Admiral Langley made the declaration that would define an era. This war won't last years. It won't last decades. It will last centuries, and we will fight it to the end of time. And so, the war across time began. The eternal soldiers and the cost of time. The war against the Zalvari had no front lines, no fixed battles. It was a war fought across centuries, where victories faded before they were won and losses echoed through history. Humanity needed soldiers who could withstand the chaos of time itself. Thus, the Eternals Initiative was born. The Eternals, soldiers unbound by time. Lieutenant Dane Carter stepped into the chronopod, heart pounding. Around him, scientists moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting controls, monitoring readouts. "This is your final chance to back out," Dr. Alina Voss said, her expression unreadable. Carter shook his head. "If I do, someone else goes in my place." A deep hum filled the chamber. The temporal stabilization field activated, wrapping him in a cocoon of flickering light. In a moment, his body would be untethered from standard time, allowing him to experience battles in fractured, shifting war zones without aging or succumbing to time sickness. Voss sighed. "When you wake up, months, years, maybe centuries will have passed." Carter gave her a final smirk. "Then I'd better make it count." The world flashed white. When Carter awoke, everything was different. The facility was gone, replaced by the ruins of a war-ravaged Earth. The skyline of New Geneva, once a thriving city, was a skeleton of its former self. His comms buzzed with unfamiliar voices. "This is Commander Rao of the Eternal Corps. If you're receiving this, you've been displaced. We're in the year 2874. The war hasn't ended." Carter had gone to sleep in 2342. Over 500 years had passed. The human cost of time war. The Eternals were warriors of the past, present, and future, sent into battles with no certainty of when they would return. Some fought for days and returned to find centuries had passed. Others vanished for millennia, only to reappear in wars that should have been ancient history. The Zalvari had no such disadvantage. Their biology allowed them to exist across multiple timelines simultaneously, fighting wars in parallel realities. Humans, bound to linear time, suffered endlessly. Entire fleets emerged from time rifts, only to discover that their mission had failed before it began. Some soldiers found themselves battling their own descendants, their names and histories long forgotten. Others received orders from admirals who had died centuries ago. Despair grew. Could humanity even win a war when time itself was the enemy? The price of eternity. On a distant battlefield, Carter led an assault against a Zalvari command ship. Plasma fire streaked across the sky, explosions rupturing the void. His squad fought with ruthless efficiency, their training honed by decades of warfare. But then, a rupture. A temporal wave blasted across the field. In an instant, Carter's men aged centuries in seconds, their bodies collapsing into dust. He alone remained, his eternal conditioning keeping him intact. The war demanded everything. Lives, futures, even the past itself. And was far from over. The fall and rise of humanity. The war had stretched beyond lifetimes. Entire generations were born and lost while soldiers like Lieutenant Dane Carter fought in a war that refused to end. Humanity had adapted, but not fast enough. The Zalvari had begun rewriting history itself. The collapse of the timeline. It began with whispers across the time front. Colonies vanishing without explanation. Battles that once ended in victory now erased from records. The Zalvari had discovered a way to send fleets backward, retroactively preventing humanity's greatest achievements. The Second Fleet of 2510, once a historic triumph, simply ceased to exist. The Battle of Helios Prime, where humanity first repelled the Zalvari, was undone. Millions of people unmade, their histories rewritten. Earth itself began to change. Cities flickered in and out of existence. Entire bloodlines were erased, as though they had never been born. In a secret war council aboard Sol Bastion, the last human stronghold orbiting Saturn, Admiral Rhea Langley slammed her fist onto the table. "We're losing the war before we even fight it," she growled. "The Zalvari are undoing our victories before they happen." Her eyes met Carter's. He had become a legend among the Eternals, a soldier who had fought across centuries and never aged a day. "We need a final move," Langley said. The chronospear, a desperate gamble. Humanity scientists proposed one last, desperate weapon. The chronospear, a device designed to collapse all time distortions and force the universe into a single, fixed timeline. No more paradoxes, no more time shifts. But there was a catch. If activated, no one knew what would remain. Some would vanish, their existence erased. Battles, victories, defeats, rewritten in an instant. The cost of stability was everything. Carter stood before the assembled commanders. "We don't have a choice. If we don't fix time, the Zalvari will erase us entirely." Silence. Then Langley nodded. "Then let's finish this." The final assault. The mission was set, strike at the heart of the Zalvari time throne, the epicenter of their nonlinear empire, and activate the chronospear. A coalition of time-warped warriors gathered. A fleet of ships from dozens of time periods, soldiers who had fought before the war began and after it should have ended. As they launched, Carter received a transmission. It was himself, an older version from another timeline. "This mission works," the future Carter said. voice filled with sorrow. But you won't remember me. Carter clenched his fist. I don't care if I remember. I just care that we win. And with that, the final battle for time itself began. The end of time's war. The final battle for existence unfolded across centuries. As Lieutenant Dane Carter and his fleet surged toward the Zalvari time throne, alarms blared across the time front. The Zalvari, sensing the threat, retaliated, deploying warships from the past, present, and future in an attempt to crush humanity's last stand. But this time, humanity was ready. The war across eras. The battle wasn't fought in a single moment. It unfolded simultaneously in different time periods. In 2451, where a fleet that had disappeared centuries ago suddenly reappeared. In 2789, where human soldiers fought in an era that had yet to exist. In 3124, where the last remnants of mankind pushed forward against overwhelming odds. Carter fought alongside three versions of himself. One younger, one older, and one from a timeline that should have never existed. We finish this now, his future self growled. No more second chances. As plasma fire streaked across the battlefield, Carter and his strike team breached the time throne, a vast structure suspended within a swirling storm of fractured reality. Inside, the very fabric of time twisted upon itself, shifting between past and future in erratic pulses. Activating the chronosphere. Deep within the throne, the chronosphere was armed. Carter and his team fought their way to its core, taking heavy losses. Around them, Zalvari warriors phased in and out of existence, their non-linear nature making them impossible to predict. Then, Carter saw himself, the version who had sent the warning before the mission began. Wounded, dying, but smiling. You made it, the older Carter said weakly. Did we win? Carter asked, gripping his weapon. His future self chuckled. You'll never know. With the last of his strength, Carter plunged the chronosphere into the throne's core. The collapse of time. A shock wave erupted, rippling across the galaxy. The time front shattered. The paradoxes unraveled. The war was erased, rewritten into a single, fixed reality. Carter screamed as existence itself bent around him. His mind fractured, caught between 1,000 possible lives, 1,000,000 different pasts. Then silence. A new reality. Carter awoke on Earth, standing beneath a bright blue sky. Birds chirped. The air was warm. The war was gone. He staggered forward, heart pounding. Cities stood where ruins should have been. There were no battleships in orbit, no alarms blaring across time. But something was wrong. No one knew his name. The war had never happened. Or rather, it had been rewritten, its battles erased from history. The Zalvari were gone, their empire never having existed. Carter looked to the horizon. He remembered everything. No one else did. A faint echo of his own voice drifted through his mind. You'll never know. And so, the soldier who had fought across centuries became a ghost of a war that had never been.